If you've ever put on a pair of blue jeans, you have that microbe to thank. And yes, it's a microbe, not just one microbe, but a whole army of them. The world's supply of blue jeans owes its iconic color to a specific microbe known as E. coli. Scientists have hacked these microbes so they can produce a natural dye called indigo at a scale large enough to turn those iconic denim fabrics blue. This is a very important invention because the old ways of making indigo are polluting the environment and hurting people's health. So this invention could be a big step towards green fashion. Let's start with some basic science. What exactly is indigo? Indigo is a blue dye that comes from plants in the Indigofera genus. But the type of indigo most commonly used for dyeing jeans isn't made directly from plants. Instead, it's produced by fermentation, a process where microorganisms like bacteria feed on a substance, breaking it down and transforming it in the process. This works great for making things like yogurt and beer. And in the case of indigo, the result is a beautiful blue pigment called indirobene. For thousands of years, this natural form of indigo was the only way to dye fabric that iconic shade of blue. But starting in the mid-19th century, chemists began figuring out how to synthesize, that is, chemically produce indigo. This meant farmers didn't have to grow it anymore, and factories could make lots of it quickly and cheaply. This synthetic version of indigo became popular for two reasons. First, it was cheap and easy to produce. And second, it was much more color-fast than the natural stuff. That means when it was applied to fabric, it didn't bleed or fade as easily, which was a huge selling point for things like blue jeans that were meant to be durable and last a long time. So it's no surprise that today almost all blue jeans get their color from this synthetic indigo. There's just one small problem. Making this synthetic indigo is kinda gross. It involves a lot of nasty chemicals including sulfuric acid and chlorine. These chemicals are super effective at producing indigo, but they're not great for the people working in the factories or the environment. Workers often don't have adequate ventilation or protective gear, and many develop severe asthma as a result. Some even go blind from the harsh chemicals. Meanwhile, the wastewater created during the process often ends up polluting nearby rivers, turning them an ominous shade of orange and killing a lot of aquatic life. And while the finished product is pretty color-fast, any excess dye molecules left over during the manufacturing process don't stay that way. They wash right out and into the water system along with everything else that was used to make those jeans. So one of the biggest benefits of the synthetic dye ends up being undone by how badly it affects the environment. So for decades, scientists have been trying to figure out how to make indigo without the harsh chemicals. One major breakthrough came in the 1980s when researchers figured out how to genetically engineer switching from oil to good old coli bacteria. This E. coli variant transforms tryptophan into indigo. Tryptophan is an amino acid found in many foods like eggs and cheese, so it's relatively easy to come by. Using this new method, farmers could grow their own indigo in giant vats simply by feeding tons of tryptophan to a colony of bacteria. This is a much greener way to make indigo than the chemical process. It doesn't involve nearly as many harsh substances and the byproduct is much less toxic. But this method still has some problems. For one thing, growing a pure culture of bacteria to make indigo is complicated and expensive. It requires sterile equipment and trained technicians and specialized facilities to make sure the bacteria don't contaminate anything else. The other problem is that while this genetically modified E. coli can make indigo, it doesn't do so particularly efficiently. You need a lot of bacteria and a lot of tryptophan to make a little bit of indigo. So there's still a lot of room for improvement if scientists want this genetically engineered E. coli to really take over the indigo market. Which brings us to a recent paper published in the journal ACS, Sustainable Chemistry and Engineering, where a team of Japanese researchers describes a new method to make indigo in a greener, cheaper way. This new method also uses modified E. coli bacteria, just like before. The bacteria have been modified to work better and faster. In particular, these bacteria can use an alternative food source. These E. coli can now produce their own tryptophan, removing the need for outside tryptophan and therefore simplifying the overall process. This makes it easier to cultivate the bacteria because you don't need to worry about contaminating the tryptophan. And it makes it cheaper too because the bacteria can just synthesize what they need instead of relying on outside sources. To test their process, the researchers grew a bunch of E. coli in giant tanks with lots of glucose, which the bacteria fermented into energy. After about 40 hours, the cultures turned a deep indigo blue. And when they filtered out the bacteria, they had enough indigo to dye 26 square meters of fabric. That's the equivalent of about 6 full-size jeans. So these bacteria successfully made indigo faster and cheaper than ever before. And since the only byproducts are water and carbon dioxide, this is a truly green way to make the world's favorite blue dye. Of course, there's still a lot of work to do before this microbe takes over the indigo industry. But the researchers hope that one day this discovery will transform the fashion world for the better. Blue jeans are such an iconic piece of clothing that we rarely stop to think about how they got that way. But this latest research shows that maybe someday we'll be able to enjoy our 5-pocket pants without harming the planet or its people. Maybe you already have clothes in your closet that you didn't realize were made using microbes. Ever heard of mushroom leather? Mycelium, the root structure of mushrooms, can be cultivated into a material that looks and feels a lot like leather. A company called Bolt Threads took this idea and ran with it, literally. They created a leather alternative called Milo, which is made from the mycelium of a non-toxic, non-hazardous mushroom species. Today, some of the biggest brands in the world are using Milo to make everything from wallets to belts to shoes. We're willing to bet money that you've bought something made with Milo. Now it's time to put your knowledge to the test. Take our quiz to learn more about how microbes make more than just your favorite pair of pants. Click below to get started.